Hello, how we doing, class? We're going to start lesson 10, World War II. In this lesson, we're going to deal with America at war, causes, strategies, leaders, and battles. Here we have a World War II cartoon of infantrymen behind a machine gun. So we're going to deal with the causes of the war. Here we have Benito Mussolini on the left and Adolf Hitler on the right. Mussolini was the fascist dictator of Italy, and Adolf Hitler was the military dictator of Nazi Germany. Totalitarian dictators, the effects and devastation of World War I, along with the economic woes of the Great Depression, led to political and social unrest all over the world. The global economy had been crippled at the end of World War I and by the end of the 1920s. This paved the way for totalitarian dictators around the world. In 1922, Benito Mussolini, aka Il Duce, rose to power under the guise of the Fascist Party. He was a World War I veteran and also a newspaper magnate, and got involved in politics as a result of the impact that World War I and the Great Depression had on Italy. The Fascist Party, this group was determined to return Italy to the glory of the Roman Empire. He led a militant group known as the Black Shirts. This group marched on Rome in October of 1922, and Mussolini was put in control of the Italian government by order of the King of Italy. Keep in mind, fascism is the Latin for fascis. It stressed nationalism and placed the interests of the state above the individual. A bundle of rods tied around an axe handle was their ancient symbol of unity and authority in ancient Rome. And here we have Il Duce on the left, Benito Mussolini, and that is the symbol of fascism on the right. Totalitarian dictators continued. In 1924, Joseph Stalin, aka the Man of Steel, gained control of the Soviet Union after the death of Vladimir Lenin. As you remember from previous lessons, the Bolsheviks rose up during World War I, and the Soviet Union became a communist state. Stalin ruled with an iron fist, in which he began the Great Purge, killing between 8 and 13 million people that he believed to be enemies of the government or communism. Even Leon Trotsky fled in exile to Mexico and was later killed. Stalin maintained complete control over his people, government, and his country's economic system of communism. In 1933, Adolf Hitler, Der Fuhrer, became the Chancellor or Prime Minister of Germany. Hitler removed the Weimar Republic and replaced it with the Nazi Party's Third Reich, which was to become a 1,000-year reign. As you know from previous lessons, Hitler served in the German army during World War I as a courier. Hitler began to preach his beliefs, which had been outlined in his novel or memoir or autobiography, manifesto, Mein Kampf. Hitler's military was called the Stormtroopers, or the Brown Shirts, later known as the SS and the Gestapo. And the military force is going to be something that we're going to talk more about later, because the Nazis are going to have crack panzer divisions, which is their tank corps. They're going to have elite infantry divisions. They'll have elite Luftwaffe air corps. So we'll discuss that more as we move into the lesson. Here's Adolf Hitler, Germany's totalitarian dictator, and on the right is the symbol of the Nazi Party. And then here we have Joseph Stalin, the Russian communist dictator, and on the right, the symbol of the Soviets, the hammer and the sickle. Totalitarian dictators continued. In 1939, Francisco Franco, aka Generalissimo, led a rebellion. It's pretty much the nationalist army to victory in the Spanish Civil War. As we have discussed in previous lessons, the Spanish Civil War was very complex. Multiple factions were involved, but Franco's nationalist faction was not only victorious, but they were also supported and propped up by the Italians and the Nazis. Franco started his war in 1936, but was eventually backed by Mussolini and Hitler. Their support for Franco led to a formal alliance in 1939 known as the Rome-Berlin Axis. This also gave the Italians, and especially the Nazis, the opportunity to get battle experience. The Italians had already invaded, by this point, Ethiopia, but both Italian and German soldiers will gain fighting experience in the Spanish Civil War, and the Nazis will be able to practice what will become known as the Blitzkrieg, the lightning strikes. In 1941, Hideki Tojo became the Prime Minister of Japan and the Japanese military dictator, leaving Emperor Hirohito a powerless figurehead. Tojo's military experience went all the way back to the invasion of China and Manchuria, a decade before. Tojo supported continued Japanese domination in China and would become one of the masterminds behind the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, that will pull America into the war. Here we have Generalissimo Francisco Franco, and here we have Hideki Tojo, Japanese Prime Minister and military dictator. And then this is Emperor Hirohito. So what we are going to be looking at are two major theaters of war. This is the European theater of war that we're going to discuss, and also on this particular map we're going to deal with the North African theater of war as well. So those are the two major theaters of war that are involved. We've got Europe and we have the North African. We'll also be dealing with the Pacific, but I'll get to that momentarily. World War II begins. Much of the causes were World War I leftovers, as I previously mentioned. Global depression, the rise of nationalism, the rise of militarism. World War II began with Hitler's invasion of Poland in 1939, followed shortly after by the Soviet Union's invasion of Poland from the east and the Baltic countries from the north. Hitler will sign the Munich Pact, but that pact was broken with Great Britain and France, which is ultimately going to pull them into this war by declaring war on Nazi Germany and Adolf Hitler. Hitler had already invaded Czechoslovakia, Austria, and the Rhineland. In January of 1940, Germany started sinking Allied ships in the Battle of the Atlantic, and that campaign will continue for the remainder of the war. We'll talk more about the naval warfare as we move forward. Here are Nazi soldiers marching into Poland. And here we have Polish defense. Do keep in mind they were not, Poland was overrun within just a month. So the non-aggression pact that was signed between Hitler and Stalin is going to lead to a two-pronged pincer movement that is going to be launched by the Germans from the west and the Soviets from the east. The German invasion was on September 1st, 1939 of Poland, and the Soviet invasion of Poland started on September 17th. 1939. From the Phoney War to Nazi occupation of Western Europe. The Phoney War was fought from 1939 to 1940. The reason it was called the Phoney War is because not a lot was really going on in the late winter and into the spring of 1940 after the invasion of Poland. Obviously, other countries were mobilizing, like Great Britain and France, but no major battles had yet occurred in Western Europe, not at least until the spring. During the first 2 years of the war, the United States stayed officially neutral. Nazi Germany was planning the Blitzkrieg, and on May 10, 1940, Germany overran France and Western Europe by land with the Blitzkrieg lightning strike tactics through the Ardennes in Belgium, which meant they outflanked the French Maginot Line. Germany also took Luxembourg, Denmark, and Norway. Operation Dynamo at Dunkirk, France, in May of 1940 saved over 300,000 British, French, and Dutch soldiers. One of the most amazing and bizarre armadas ever seen in history. Anything that could float across the English Channel went across to rescue these soldiers from the Nazi Blitz. The Battle of Britain was the German Luftwaffe strike from late July of 1940 through October of 1940, and this was the Luftwaffe versus the British Royal Air Force. But in the end, thanks to the bravery of the British airmen, the amazing work of men and women who served as air traffic controllers, but also the British use of radar, the British were able to defeat the Luftwaffe. In mid-1941, Hitler will violate the Non-Aggression Pact when he invades the Soviet Union, and that invasion became known as Operation Barbarossa, which is ultimately going to spread the Nazi army way too thin. He will further spread the Nazi army even more thin by commissioning the Afrika Korps that will ultimately be led by Erwin Rommel. We'll talk more about that as we move forward. And this will be created to assist Italy in maintaining control of colonies in North Africa, but also in an attempt to capture the vital Suez Canal and southern access to the Soviet Union and the oil fields in the Caucasus that would help fuel the war machine. Stalin decided to join the Allied forces after Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union in Operation Barbarossa. Franklin D. Roosevelt will win re-election for a third consecutive term in 1940 in another landslide victory over Republican challenger Wendell Willkie. This was a shift from neutrality to non-belligerency because in 1940 the United States will institute its first ever peacetime draft. Here we have a political cartoon of Hitler breaking the Non-Aggression Pact, also known as the Russo-German Pact, also known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. It says, "Forgive me, comrade, but it seems such a good opportunity." It's got the Nazi invasion into Russia. This is a German photograph of a Heinkel 3. This bomber, Luftwaffe bomber, was dropping its bombs during the Battle of Britain. This is a British scout looking for Luftwaffe planes in London. So American aid and movement toward war. America begins to move from isolationism. Despite strong isolationist sentiment at home, the United States increasingly helped Britain with old naval warships in return for military bases in Bermuda and in the Caribbean. These two programs became known as Lend-Lease and the Destroyer Deal. Franklin D. Roosevelt appointed General George C. Marshall, VMI graduate class of 1901. We're very proud of him at the Virginia Military Institute as the Army Chief of Staff, and America will institute this peacetime draft in 1940. America starts to begin to train its soldiers and sailors for combat. America gave Britain, the Soviets, China, among other nations, war supplies in 1941 through what was called the Lend-Lease Act. This actually created a pretty controversial scenario. Franklin D. Roosevelt compared Lend-Lease to lending a garden hose to a next door neighbor whose house was on fire. But the opposition was led by Gerald Nye and the Nye Committee. They were an isolationist committee that did not want to see America enter World War II, and they were not supporters of Lend-Lease. And this is where we're going to stop. This first part of the lesson is a Dr. Seuss cartoon. It says, "It's truly encouraging how much of this stuff drifts into British ports." And it says 2/3 of the way to England. And this is supply being dropped into the Atlantic because there was a tremendous amount of Lend-Lease goods that wound up in the hands of the British. So this is where we will stop. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.